كما في السماء كذلك على الأرض خبزنا كفافنا.
All right, guys, welcome back. It's been about 2 weeks, and we have not done a lecture. So we're going to be picking up with the second part to chapter 5. And it's just going to be the last section. So what I'll do is I'll start with how I normally start with the creed, the prayers, and then I will do a brief recap of what we went over before, and then jump straight into the last section of chapter 5. And then we'll pick up again next week with chapter 6 of the philosophical chapters. So let's just jump straight into it. I believe in one God, Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all ages, light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not created, of one essence with the Father, through whom all things were made, who for us men and for our salvation came down from heaven and was incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. He was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate and suffered and was buried. And he rose on the third day according to the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. And he will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. His kingdom shall have no end. And in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the creator of life, who proceeds from the Father, who together with the Father and the Son is worshipped and glorified, who spoke through the prophets, and in one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church, I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. I look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come. Amen. And then we'll say our prayers in Arabic and in English. أبانا الذي في السماوات ليتقدس اسمك ليأتي ملكوتك لا تكون مشيئتك كما في السماء كذلك على الأرض خبزنا كفافنا أعطينا اليوم واغفر لنا ذنوبنا كما نغفر نحن أيضا للمذنبين إلينا ولا تدخلنا في التجربة لكن نجنا من الشرير لأن لك الملك القوة والمجد إلى الأبد. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who've trespassed against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, both now and forever, unto the ages of ages. Bismil ab wal-ibn wa ruh al-qudus, ilahin wahid. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. All right, guys. So we're going to pick up back on chapter 5. So in chapter 5, we were talking about some of these. They're called the 5 predicables. And let me actually take out my notes and kind of go through that particular section so we can kind of just get reacquainted with this here. Because this is like really the heart of the matter. And if you remember those 10 categories when we were talking about the Aristotelian categories, this kind of goes into that. So for those who don't even remember the 10 categories, they're substance, quantity, reality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and affection. And then the latter 9 of those being accidents. So if you remember what accidents and things like that were, that's cool. If you don't, that's okay, because we're going to get right back into that. So in chapter 5, as we're going through what St. John of Damascus is saying here, he's talking about language and terms, and typically like why language and the use of terms is so important, and why using particular types of terms pick out particular types of things, and how important that is just for organizational purposes. But the 5 predicables that we were talking about, and that's just like a term that was coined by, I believe the guy's name is like Porphyry. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he had a book called the Isagoge, which was like an introduction to Aristotelian categories, and he kind of like made a broad sense of 5, and he put them into like 5 categories, and those 5 predicables are genus, species, difference, property, and accident. Now, what's going to be really interesting here is kind of like what St. John of Damascus does is he takes us through this chapter and he really like breaks down why these things are important, why we need to know them, and how they apply to obviously like a created order. But he's setting the foundation, because if you understand it from a created order's perspective, when we apply it in a particular sense to God, it's not going to be super confusing. So he starts off by talking about, the meaningful use of terms, and how, like, he says, like, well, when human beings talk, it's meaningful, it's useful. But when, dogs bark or whatever, it doesn't mean the same thing or have the same type of use as when a human talks or expresses sound, right? It's going to be different. When a dog barks, it's going to be something that's not necessarily intelligible, but it does have some type of corollary with our understanding of sound. And he gave an example, like when a dog barks, it's going to be like maybe to alert an owner or something like that. But when we speak or when we communicate or whatever, it's going to actually hold meaningful, intelligible corollaries. And then, like, we jump into what I determined to be section 2, when he starts talking about essential and non-essential things. And he's saying, like, for instance, like something that is essential to man is going to be that he is relational, that he's mortal, and that he's an animal. And remember when we went over the disclaimer here, like, we're not saying that when they use animal in Aristotelian metaphysics, whenever you see the word animal, he's not saying that he's an animal without rationale, or that he's an animal like a dog or something like that. The term animal is just coming from the Greek zoon, which just means living being, right? So a dog is a living being, but so is a human. And for just a broader category, within Aristotelian metaphysics, they just refer to those things as animals so that we can all have them under a broad category. And that actually leads into the next section, kind of like where we left off on, with the essential terms of genus, species, and difference. And what St. John of Damascus does is he actually kind of starts from the back instead of the front. You would naturally think that we'd start with genus, but he actually starts with difference, then he goes into species, and then he goes into genus. And when we get to genus, it'll make sense why man would be categorized as a quote-unquote animal. So just a brief recap. Difference is just going to be an essential term that we use that shows the difference. It's just like distinguishing marks between this and between that. So like, for instance, like a distinguishing mark between man and maybe like, I think St. John of Damascus gives like the example of a horse or something. He says the difference is going to be that man is rational, right? But a horse is not rational. And what we mean by rational is just going to be something that possesses the ability to have cognizance in a meaningful way, in an intelligible way. And animals like dogs, cats, they don't have that particular type of capacity as human beings do. And we believe that scripturally the reason why is because we were the only things that were created in the image of God. So this is why when God incarnated, he people will say, well, why didn't God incarnate as like a pig or something like that? Well, because for one, they weren't made in his image, but also they're not rational. Like those particular types of animals, those species, those different types of species, they're irrational. I mean, if any of you guys own a dog and like the dog throws up, it literally goes and eats its own throw up and then does it again, and then eats its throw up and then does it again, and then eats its So, I mean, obviously humans don't do that. And if a human does do that, we would say that they're not in their right state of mind. So anyways, getting back to the particular topic. So the idea of like genus, species, and difference. So that would be a difference. The difference is just going to be, it's like a term that we use to show a distinguishing mark between this and between that, right? So for human beings, it's going to be that we're rational, but the difference is going to be that in horses, dogs, whatever, they are irrational. That's going to be what we call a quote unquote difference. Then he goes on to explain species. And essentially kind of like what he explains a species as is going to be something that signifies a numerically different man. If we're talking about just the species of man, right? It's going to be a numerically different man than another man. I'm trying to put a way to make sense. So anything within the particular type of species holds the same nature, but numerically they are different. So numerically, Peter is different than Paul. They are different instantiations in time, but they do hold that same particular type of nature that makes them man, right? So they fall under the same type of species, and within a species, they hold the same nature, but there's different, there's actual individuation, there's different instantiations of that particular species. And then now you see why, because he's going to explain what genus is. And now you're going to see why I say that St. John of Damascus puts genus last instead of first. And if you remember when we were talking earlier and I said, well, I'll come to this particular aspect last, it's because genus is going to be the broad category that we kind of fit all of these things in. It's like a box, and we fit species and these other things different. We fit all of that in that box, and genus is the top that we use to close the box, right? So what genus is more, the way St. John of Damascus describes it is it's going to be more, it's going to be a more universal term than species. And what he means by that is that I think he actually uses the particular like word here. He actually says that genus, he phrases it this way, that genus includes several species. So like, you know, we've already described species, but let's say that you have different types of species, like the species of horse, species of dog, and then you have man as a particular type of species as well. Well, he says all of those species fit in or are under a genus, and he uses genus is the lid on the box that closes it, right? So that's why he says genus includes several species. And like I guess an example that you can understand is that like animal, and this is the exact same example I gave earlier, but now that you have a better understanding of the terms, you might understand this better. Animal kind of falls under genus, and many, like, you know, and man or an ox or a horse or a dog or whatever under species. And then if you want to break it down even further than that, you could say like individuals, persons, hypostasis, which is the same thing. They fall under man. So there's many different subcategories and ways that we organize this. And what I mean by the same thing is, just so anybody was thinking, individual, person, and hypostasis, those are the same when we're talking about Aristotelian metaphysics. And if you guys want like a much deeper recap, then just go back to lecture 5.1, and you'll be able to get that. And I think it'll make a lot of sense. So just to like sum it up from what we just talked about with genus, species, difference. So genus includes several species, and species include several individuals. Okay. So now let's actually move into the last section, and I'm going to read from what St. John of Damascus says, and then we'll actually get into explaining it. It's not long. It's like maybe a page. So if you have the book or if you have the PDF, we are on page 19, and we're towards the middle, and it says this. Okay. Now one must know that this is called essential, natural, constituent, and distinguishing and specific difference, essential quality and natural property of a nature. It is very properly said by the philosophers to be a difference which is presentative of the nature possessing it and most proper to this nature itself. And now he's going to explain property. A property is that which exists in one species and in the entire species, and which is always in it and is conversely predicable with it. Take, for example, the property of laughter. Thus, every man can laugh, and everything that can laugh is a man. An accident is that in which something is of a certain sort, and which is predicated of several things differing in species, but which does not enter into the definition. It can either be or not be. For when present, it does not assure the existence of the species, and when it is absent, the species is not destroyed. It is called a non-essential difference in quality. It is either separable or inseparable. That accident is separable, which is sometimes present and sometimes absent in the same hypostasis. As would be, and then he explains, as would be sitting, lying, standing, sickness, or health. Now, if you guys remember, that falls under Aristotle's 10 categories, and those are accidents. That's what he's saying. And by hypostasis, when it's being applied to a created order, he just means like an individual, like that could be any individual. But he means like in this particular situation, I guess he's talking about an individual person. That, on the other hand, is inseparable, which is not constituent of a substance because it is not found in the entire species, but which, nevertheless, when it does become present in some hypostasis, cannot be separated from it. Such, for example, he's going to give an example of the inverse. Such, for example, are the having of a snub nose, being hook-nosed, being gray-haired, and the like. This inseparable accident is called a characteristic peculiarity. This is because such distinctiveness produces the hypostasis, which is to say, and basically what he says, which means the individual. And an individual is that which subsists in itself of substance and accidents, is numerically distinct from the others of the same species, and does not signify what but whom. So it doesn't signify the what, it signifies the who. And most of you guys are very familiar with that because it's going to sound familiar. In the following, we shall, with God's help, learn more accurately about these. And that ends chapter 5. Now, let's break down what we just read. Let me get my notes so I can kind of explain this, because he did say a lot. And in some aspects, I don't really like the way that the book translates some of this stuff, because it kind of makes it hard to follow. So I did my best writing down notes and going through each one of these distinctively so I can break this down in modern English. So, obviously bear with me. Okay, so essentially in this particular section, this last section of chapter 5, he's basically talking about things that are non-essential or non-essential terms. And he breaks them into two categories, which is property and accident. Now, property, he explains, is just like is a non-essential term that kind of explains a thing that belongs to one species alone. And for the example he gives is laughter. He says laughter belongs, like as a property, laughter belongs to man alone, and kneeing, like, the sound that horses make, belong to horses alone. Now, somebody may object and say, wait a minute, but human beings aren't the only things that laugh. Like, what about parrots? Like, parrots laugh, like birds laugh. Yeah, but they're not rationally laughing. And that's the thing, they just copy us. But you can't tell a joke to a parrot and then the parrot's gonna interpret, understand, nuance, and that's not gonna happen. Human beings are the only created beings that can do that. I don't know if anybody else knew that, but humans are the only ones that have this idea of comedy. I've never seen Siberian wolves in the Arctic opening freaking comedy act stores. So he says here that, okay, well, laughter belongs to man alone and kneeing belongs to horses alone. The same way, like maybe, barking belongs to dogs alone, and, things like that. So then basically what St. John of Damascus does here with this example is he's saying that a property exists in one entire species, right? And it's always in it. And it's something that can be, reciprocably predicable. Basically, it's something that can be restated, right, within it. So basically, like, if we want to break it down, I guess we could say it in a way that makes sense. That's like really plain and simple. What can laugh is man, and every man can laugh or will laugh, right? And another thing that we bring up too, because this is actually really interesting. This is also why we don't say that like the property is the essence, but rather that the property flows from the essence. So for those of us who are Orthodox, we make a real distinction between hypostatic properties and essential properties, and we don't say that they are each other. We make an actual real distinction, and it's for this reason. Like, it actually, like, this can even be found in, as we see here, Aristotelian metaphysics. Like, we don't say that the property is the essence, because if that were the case, then we just be like kind of blurring the two fields, and it'd be hard for us to really categorize things properly. Now, obviously, like for our Catholic friends, like they have a nuance with that and they explain it in their own ways. But I'm just speaking specifically for those of us who are Orthodox. This is the reason why we say, and there's other reasons, obviously, too. But as we go through this, it's going to be made abundantly more clear why we don't say that like the hypostatic properties are the essence. Okay, so then he goes on to describe accidents. And he says that an accident as a non-essential term is something that points to several species. So not just the one species, but it points to several species. And one of the examples is whiteness or blackness or whatever color you want. We'll just use whiteness for this example because I think that's the one that he gives. But whiteness can be found in man as a species. It can also be found in horses as a species. It can also be found in oxen as a species. And if you guys remember when we did the whole lecture on accidents, they can either be or not be present in the species. And that's actually what St. John says several times. They can either be in the species or not be in the species, and it's not going to destroy the species. Like, it doesn't change the quote unquote essence of the species if it is in it or if it's not in it. Furthermore, actually, like accidents where this is concerned, according to St. John of Damascus, he kind of breaks them into like two more categories. So again, just bear with me, and you obviously listen back to the lecture if it gets a little confusing. But he even breaks this down into like two more categories, and he calls them separable accidents and inseparable accidents. So a separable accident is something that can be present or not present in the same hypostasis, right? That's something like, whiteness. But an inseparable accident and this kind of like, it's a little nuanced. It's not something, it's not a part of the essence. But once it's present in an individual, once it's present in the hypostasis, it can't be separated. So like, for instance, like of I'll give two examples of these just so we can really get this. So let's go back to a separable accident, because if I juxtapose it with the inseparable accident, you'll be able to understand this a little bit better. A separable accident is going to be something like sitting down, lying down, standing, being sick or being healthy. Those are the examples that St. John of Damascus gave earlier. Well, why? Because these come and go. Like, so for instance, like me within the same species as the rest of you guys, I'm talking right now. You guys are not talking, but it doesn't now, because you guys are not talking, it doesn't make you less man or less human. I mean, just like if I'm talking and you're not talking, it doesn't make me less human for talking, right? Those are things that come and go. If you remember from the St. John of Damascus lecture that we did through on the Orthodox faith, these are things that are non-subsistent, right? Like, or subsistence and non-subsistence, right? Non-subsistence in the aspect of like like dissipating into air, when he was explaining the difference between subsistence and non-subsistence and stuff like that. So that's an example of a separable accident. Now, the example of a inseparable accident he gives is something like a snub nose. Now, if you remember, an inseparable accident is, I'll say it again, it's not something that's a part of the essence, but once it's in the individual that has the essence, it can't be separated. Hence the term inseparable accident. So what are these things? Well, a snub nose, a hook nose, or gray hair, right? Like, so if you're born with a snub nose, or if you're born with like a chiseled jaw or something, you can't now, and obviously this was the time before plastic surgery, but you can't unchisel your jaw. You can't unsnub your nose. You can't, like, and the reason why these are more inseparable accidents is because obviously, like, if you, let's say even during that time, right, before plastic surgery, suppose like, somebody, unfortunately, like if they mutilate you or something, and they, chop your nose off or something like that, or they, do something to your jaw or cut off all your hair. Well, I mean, it's not going to change you as a human being. But the reason why he brings these out, and this actually goes right into the next section, these are inseparable accidents because in St. John of Damascus classifies these as characteristic peculiarities. Why? Well, because it helps to show, or it marks the individual. So with these, like, I guess like the one species will indicate, like that they all have that same particular type of nature. But all individuals within that particular species, they have their own characteristic peculiarities, right? And these characteristic peculiarities or inseparable accidents is going to be what helps us to identify the individual. Now, obviously, St. John of Damascus and the Cappadocian fathers, who were all very well educated, they understood all of this stuff. They kind of use some of the terminology, obviously, to help us to understand how we can explain the Trinity logically. Well, I mean, like, how does this? Well, okay, if we're talking about what makes the Father distinct from the Son, what is the characteristic peculiarity between the Father and the Son? Well, the Father is that he's unbegotten. That's a character. If we're going to use it in this broad sense, obviously it's not a one-to-one. So obviously, guys, but I'm just saying, like, in a sense, you can understand how even this can be used and how the Cappadocians would have applied this. The Father is unbegotten and the Son is begotten. The Spirit, our Catholic friends will say that the Spirit spirates. Within the Orthodox Church, we say like proceeds from the Father, but it's the same thing. But these are what we could understand potentially to be characteristic peculiarities because, for one, and I'm not saying that God has accidents. So again, I'm not saying God has accidents. I'm just saying, like, if we're going to apply this in a general or broad sense, you could look at it this way without applying it fully. And if you remember, even from the last lecture, I explained this. I said, like, just because, that's going to be like an equivocation fallacy. Just because St. John of Damascus and the Cappadocians use some of the same terminology doesn't mean that we affirm it in every single instance, in every single way, the same way that Aristotle used it or whatever. But at the same time, to avoid a genetic fallacy, we're not going to say that because Aristotle or maybe Platonists use particular terms, that the term in and of itself is false. That'd be another fallacy, which is called a genetic fallacy. So we need to understand, and this is actually the whole purpose of this chapter, the idea of terms, terminology, organization, categories, so we can understand that in particular situations, how things ought to be used and utilized properly. So, those would be those particular type of characteristic peculiarities. if we were to apply it in a broader general sense when talking about the Trinity. But the reason why we don't apply these in the same way in every aspect of the Trinity is because obviously these Aristotelian metaphysics categories is being used for different individuals that are actually separate from each other. They are instantiations in time, but with God there is no the Father came first, then the Son, then the Spirit. No, the Holy Trinity exists outside of space, time, matter. So it's not going to be applied in the same way because logically it's not going to follow if we hold like a classical understanding of these things, which the Orthodox Church does. So just to kind of like sum it up, and then I'll open it up for any type of questions. I got maybe about 10 minutes left. Just to break everything down and kind of like explain what we just explained in case anybody was still wondering. Let me think. Okay, so we can explain or understand it like this. So genus is like that giant broad category that, that species go in, which can include like, animal. But the animal, can either be like man, it can actually be what we would understand today as animals like horses and dogs and things like that. And within those, you're going to have things that are what St. John of Damascus has explained to us as difference. And the difference is going to be, so for instance, the difference between within that category of animal, the difference between dogs and man is that, well, man is rational and dogs are irrational. That's going to be the quote unquote difference, right? And then within these, within man, you'll have particular type of properties. And the properties are going to be something like laughter, because only man laughs. And even that, there's going to be a distinction because animals, in the aspect of if we're going to be picking out dogs or cats, they don't laugh. Why? Well, because they're irrational, but men laugh because they're rational. Sorry, go ahead, Blanco. Oh, sorry, bro. Go ahead. You said what?
Was it called, was it not time for questions, or could I ask you the question?
Oh, give me like 2 more minutes. I'm almost done.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And then like, within the individuals, like, we have like, accidents that can be, in many different species, but if they are or if they are not in the species, it doesn't destroy the species. And we gave the example of like white, like the color whiteness. It can be in many different species at the same time, but it doesn't pick out what particular type of species we're talking about, but it also doesn't destroy the species either. Because dogs can be white, horses can be white, men can be white. So it doesn't pick out the species, but it doesn't destroy the species either. But how we'll know within a particular species the difference between Peter and John is what St. John of Damascus describes as characteristic peculiarities, which would be like a snub nose or a hooked jaw or gray hair, as he described. So that's how even within those particular species, we can tell the difference between, the individuals because of the characteristics that make them distinct. And then next week we'll get into chapter 6, and we'll, do it much the same way. Questions, Blanco, you said you had a question.
About the laughter thing, does this apply because we're picking out cats and dogs, or like, is this supposed to be like general for all animals?
Right. So
because there's animals that we know laugh.
Well, right, and that's what I explained earlier. So the reason why laughter is a property that is specific for men is because whenever we laugh, it's because we're rational. That's going to be the difference between us and like parrots. So parrots, they are irrational and they don't actually laugh. Like, I've never seen a parrot open like do stand up or something like that. Like, it just copies us.
Well, I don't mean to cut you off. Maybe this is like some very niche information that most people don't know about, but like mice and rats laugh, and they laugh because they're entertained, like they're having fun, like they laugh while they play fight, and they can be tickled, and they laugh.
Oh,
so
wow.
like,
I didn't know that.
Like we actually can't even hear them laugh. They laugh at a supersonic level. You need a special microphone to be able to hear it, but they do laugh. So now, like, I can understand what you're saying with, like, because we commonly think hyenas laugh, but that's not a laugh. That's actually them kind of scaring their target. Like, it's actually a certain call they do.
Right.
But when it comes to, like, the case of, like, mice and rats, they're actually laughing because they're playing.
Right.
So,
and I think,
yeah.
And I think that's what St. John of Damascus is explaining. Now, obviously, like, this is not divine revelation. So I don't think St. John of Damascus had little tiny microphones where he could.
Right, exactly. That's why I was like,
tickle mice.
Because if we pick out one. Yeah.
But I think the point that he was making is, like, just from a broad understanding or just from a broad category, like, whenever you see animals laugh, from his observation, obviously, and from Aristotle's observation, whenever you see animals laugh, it's not because, like, oh, like, I just thought of, like, this really funny joke. And I know that if I convey this joke to another individual that's rational, that they also would understand. So he's just saying, like, this particular property is gonna be what picks out a species that is rational, and that's going to be the difference between a species that is irrational. I guess since we're, more advanced now in civilization, we can figure it out. But at that particular time, it suited its purpose. It was good enough to figure out, the difference. But obviously, we could probably find something else to substitute that. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I don't like to, like, nitpick or anything like that.
No, dude. Like, it's definitely a good. I mean, this is not, like I said, this is not scripture, right? Like, it's just we're giving general principles and general ideas to understand things. And as long as you understand the principle of why something is said, you can apply it to anything. And you just pick a different example.
Okay. It's not meant. Okay. Yeah. All right. Taking it a little too literally, I guess. So that's all right.
No, it's cool.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's cool. It's definitely a good question.
Yeah,
like Lester, you had a question too?
Well, I was going to ask a question about accidents since there's inseparable.
Yep.
And I was going to ask if the incarnation is an inseparable accident because it's within the hypostasis, not within the nature.
I mean, we wouldn't really call the incarnation an accident, and the reason we wouldn't call it an accident is because accidents dissipate. And we don't believe...
Okay.
Yeah, and then also, like, accidents, like, they can change. And, like, obviously, like, with the idea of an accident is going to be something within a particular individual or within a particular person that can change, that can be there. It can actually change, but not change the actual nature. But the reason why we couldn't call the incarnation an accident is because Christ is a divine person that has two natures. So if we say that the incarnation in that aspect is an accident, then it would say that Christ is passable as a person. Now, if you want to say things like within the human nature that Christ assumed as a divine person, that human nature underwent change because, like, it says that he grew in stature, like wisdom and like, he got taller, he ate, he slept, then that's fine. But as a divine person, we can't say that, the incarnation would be an accident.
Okay, I would just, because what I'm kind of comparing it to this idea that God can't be perturbed, he can't be angry, but it's a result of him interacting with humanity.
Right. Like
when he gets angry, because he's just according to his nature, but anger is a result of dealing with beings that are unjust.
Right.
And then the same for mercy or forgiveness with love.
Right. I mean, so say it again. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your point correctly.
Okay, so I asked. Oh, which part? The second part or the first part?
The second.
Like the first question.
The second part.
Okay. So I asked if the incarnation is an accident because it's an inseparable character within the hypostasis.
Right.
And you said it's no because accidents aren't subsistent, right? Or they can change. Well, they can change because they're non-subsistent.
They're non-subsistent, right. But the inseparable accident is going to be, okay, you know what? I see what you're saying. I see exactly what you're saying. Because Christ assumed the human nature, he can't be separated from it. He forever is and will always be the God-man. That's a good point, man. I don't know. The only thing I would say is, because St. John of Damascus, he says that the inseparable accidents, there's a caveat with it. He says that it's not a part of the essence, right? But once it's present in the individual, it can't be separated. And I just have caution saying yes because it's an accident, right? Because, like, for instance, if you remember how I said, like, some of the inseparable accidents that St. John of Damascus gives is like a snub nose, or, you know, gray hair or something like that, or like a hooked jaw or something like that. Well, within created beings, like, I can actually cut your nose off, right? And the idea of the inseparable accident, it's a play on words. The reason it's called an inseparable accident is because it picks out the person. We would just say that the incarnation is not what picks out the person. The incarnation is something that the person did, right, via the inseparable operations, but actually what picks out the person is the fact that he's begotten. It's not the fact that he incarnated, because from the beginning he didn't incarnate. So the idea of the inseparable accident, as St. John of Damascus explains, is that it's something that distinguishes the individual, like how a hooked jaw does, or a snub nose or something like that. But for the person of the Son, that's not actually what picks out the Son. What picks out the Son is that he's begotten from the Father, not the fact that he incarnated, although that is something you can use to pick out the Son, but it is not something that necessarily picks out the Son, because what picks out the Son from the beginning, before, you know, all of creation, before all of this, was that he was begotten, that he's eternally begotten. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay. So I understand the fact that it's to pick out the character or hypostatic properties of an individual.
Yep.
And the hypostatic property of the Son is not an accident.
Yeah.
And that's but it is inseparable because it's not an accident.
Well, I mean, I would just say that it's inseparable. It's a good question, man. Like, I don't know. Like, for me personally, I just have reservations with saying accident, because I know what an accident is.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem saying that it's inseparable.
Yeah.
But and this actually goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Aristotelian metaphysics, and why we don't why we don't use all of them and apply it to God, because you can use the category of inseparable accidents to a created order. But if we start using terms like inseparable accident of one of the divine persons, then we risk actually within that particular divine person holding to some form of Nestorianism. And I just like, for me, like, I just wouldn't say that. I would say that the human nature he assumed is inseparable, but I just wouldn't say that it's an inseparable accident for fear of what it might entail.
I get it. I mean, you also have the obvious, which is that you can't talk about this with a Muslim because they're like, see, accident.
Oh, well, yeah. You got poo-poo. See? You got poo-poo. Like, all right, bro.
Well, and then I forgot what I was going to ask. You go on next.
Oh, no, it's okay. I mean, that's actually it. Because I got to shut the lecture down in about 2 minutes to clock back in. But next week, the same day, I'm probably just going to do one lecture a week. It's probably going to take us forever to get through the philosophical chapters, but that's okay. Just because, like, I'm actually, like, doing a lot more lives now. I'm debating online. I'm doing a lot of stuff. So it's like trying to do the lectures every day is almost impossible with editing and stuff. But this is good because it gives everybody a week to actually study the chapter before we meet. So, Blanco, do you have a question?
I mean, everybody will play nice. I do got one more question.
All right, give me 1 second. Let me go ahead and end this really quick. I'm going to go ahead and shut the recording down so I can upload it later.
Okay.
And then I'll let you ask the question. So, guys, if you're listening to the replay right now, go ahead, make sure you like the video. Make sure that you've subscribed. Hopefully you're subscribed because you're a member if you're watching this. But if you had any questions, if you want to go deeper, go to lecture 5.1, which is the one before this, and I'll put a link in the video itself. But other than that, Bismillah, al-Qudus, ilahin wahid, one God, Ameen.
كما في السماء كذلك على الأرض خبزنا كفافا